Critics of solitary confinement say New York State is violating the newly established HALT Act. Now, HALT, which stands for Humane Alternatives to Long-Term Solitary Confinement, took effect in April.
Among other things, it limits the use of segregated confinement in state prisons and counties jails. News 4 Investigates takes a look at the reason advocates and critics of the law are still butting heads. Luke Moretti reports.
They need to follow the law. Why is it so hard?
That's a question directed at the State Department of Corrections and the way it manages solitary confinement in state prisons.
Why is it so hard? Why is it so hard to do what the law says?
Jerome Wright is a co-director of the HALT Solitary Confinement Campaign. He knows a thing or two about the subject, having spent 30 years in state prison for a murder conviction in the late 1970s. His longest stretch in solitary was 2.5 years.
I think that solitary is man's greatest inhumanity to man. When you're treated like an animal, well, how are you supposed to act? When you're treated like an animal, not just being caged, but now isolated and ostracized, two of the worst things you can ever do to a human being.
Wright and other advocates of the HALT Act are accusing state corrections of repeatedly violating elements of the law. Among other things, the HALT Act limits the amount of time a person in state prison or jail can remain in solitary, or what's known as segregated confinement.
The law limits that to 15 consecutive days. Nobody in New York State under the law is allowed to be held in those conditions beyond 15 consecutive days.
Numbers released by state corrections show that more than half of inmates held in solitary confinement spent beyond 15 consecutive days in each of the 3 months data was released. That's more than 200 each month. State Corrections argues that since the HALT law took effect, violence is up and more inmates are serving time in segregated confinement. Residential rehabilitation units, which allow inmates to transition out of solitary, are at near full capacity. And because of that, some inmates stay in solitary longer than the law allows.
The HALT Act is flawed completely from top to bottom.
Michael Powers is the president of the union representing state correctional officers.
The violence inside our correctional settings has gone through the roof, has skyrocketed, and it's evident everywhere.
Powers claims that the number of staff members injured during a violent assault increased by 40% over the first 6 months of HALT, compared to the 6 months just prior to the law taking effect. He shared pictures of injured correctional officers with News 4 Investigates. We want to warn you that the photos are graphic and could be disturbing to some viewers.
And the pictures and the graphics that I could show you of the violence in these facilities, it's ridiculous. Officers assaulted, ripped across the face, and beaten. Female beaten to, she's unrecognizable.
They're saying numbers is going up of violence because of HALT. It was going up before HALT.
In June, a federal judge tossed a lawsuit brought by the Union for Correctional Officers. The union alleged that the HALT law would lead to increased violence in state prisons, calling the change in policies and practices a state-created danger. But the judge dismissed that argument, writing, "The court cannot assume that because the HALT Act was passed, inmates in New York prisons will commit more violent acts."
We read the judge's ruling, and we saw where she was coming from, but she doesn't have a full grasp.
Powers believes the judge would have had a better understanding by walking through facilities and talking to staff.
She's just following the letter of the law. So, with that being said, we have proven since April 1, when HALT came into effect, we're up 40% on assaults on staff, and even higher percent, 42 maybe, for inmate-on-inmate assaults.
They're saying that their office is in jeopardy. I bet you, I will put money on, I will put my my freedom on. I'll go back to prison right now if they can show me 10 guys right now who just assaulted people and it's because of HALT.
There isn't much that advocates and critics agree on when it comes to HALT. Even the use of the term solitary confinement is a sticking point.
You know, everybody throws the term solitary confinement around. Solitary confinement doesn't exist. Not in North America, not in this country. This is segregation, and basically what that comes down to is this is no BS here. An inmate in SHU, special housing unit, which advocates call solitary confinement, is get more services in a day than an inmate in general population.
And whatever name you give it, the harm of what I call solitary confinement, what the world calls solitary confinement, is people having social isolation, right? Being locked in a space without meaningful human engagement.
Advocates say they will continue monitoring and pushing for full compliance of the HALT Act, especially the limits on consecutive days in special housing. In the meantime, State Corrections tells News 4 investigates that it's working diligently to create new residential rehabilitation unit capacity to move more individuals from special housing faster and efficiently. Luke Moretti, News 4.